In this video, I want to answer now question 3. So this one is about your vocal, and basically what they want you to do is to take away any noise. This is going to be editing an audio file. So in the first instance, the same thing goes. I want you to highlight where exactly in Ableton this editing will take place. So again, just notice how I've got this now looped. This will give you that visual of where you need to edit this. So what you're listening out here for, I think, are any like paper rattlings or any sort of like coughing or anything in here that is not a vocal part. Okay, so in the first instance, the paper rattling or the noise is right here. Now this is very important. You don't want to edit any of the original vocal. So notice how I am zooming in. And the rattling really happens around here. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight that and I'm going to cut it out. Notice how that there is a little bit of that paper rattling right here. Now again, I want to remind you that whenever you're editing any audio within Ableton, by default, Ableton will apply a fade out to this. If it was me, what I would do is pull this back until you can't hear any of that paper rattling and maybe just give it a little bit of fade out. This is important because you don't want to cut off any of that vocal at all. Notice how that there is a little bit more here. So all I'm going to do is get rid of that. Now, this is really important. Most students on this test saw that they edited a certain section of this music and they thought that was the end of it. I would always recommend that you check the entire file. So here is another instance of noise. And all I'm going to do with this is I'm going to highlight it and then just get rid of it. For the sake of argument, let me just get rid of that as well. So to get rid of this, it's really simple. Just have your mouse over the end here and then just drag it in like this. Always make sure that when you listen to the end of this vocal, A, that you haven't chopped anything out for her vocal, but also that you haven't got any noise in there. So just looking at the mark scheme, what they've said here is at 134 that they've taken out any sort of like paper noise whatsoever. Notice as well that they've mentioned for the mark 1, parts of the vocal cut out. In other words, if you would have cut out that vocal at the very end, they would have given you 1 out of a 3 for this. So just looking at this mark scheme, all they want you to do is take out this paper rustle. Notice how they're going to give you 1 out of a 3 if you cut any part of that vocal out. The same thing goes for cutting that noise at the very end. Okay, so in the first instance, notice that I've now highlighted and I looped now the area that I need to adjust. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find out what the frequencies were before this. To do this, I just need a spectrum. So again, go into your audio effects here, go down to spectrum and drag and drop that spectrum onto that track. Given this, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have a look at the previous bar. So this graph should give you an understanding of where the frequencies are in this piece. And what I would do is simply compare the start of this with the looped part that you need to edit. Notice in this looped part that will occur at the end of 16 that the higher end of this has been cut off. So in Ableton, you're going to go into Audio Effects, and you're going to take an EQ8 and just drag and drop that onto your track. As you saw, the higher end of this vocal needed to be boosted a little bit. What I would recommend is that you take this 4th filter, and all I'm going to do now is just sort of play around with boosting up that higher end. This might give you the correct answer, in which case then great, leave that one alone. You might need also to sort of play around with certain frequencies. You might also need to sort of play around with certain frequencies in here, which is quite normal. Another thing that you could do is move this down to a low cut filter and just take out that lower end. So again, just going back to the mark scheme, notice how all it says is that the EQ is going to match the rest of the audio. They're not specifically saying that you must use a certain EQ or a certain filter on this. So in other words, what I'm trying to get to is do your absolute best to see if you can match the previous bar with that bar 18.